at some point.
Perfect.
I was already getting asked this a handful of times right before I signed on.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Yes, I'm going to record it and then upload it.
It'd be one big happy family in here.
Yeah. Do you know if there's a way to turn off the chime?
There may be a sound preferences.
Yeah, let's see.
Usually, if you hit participants or the caret next to participants, there will be an option on by the side, like either 3 buttons or somewhere, and you could hit play or mute the join and leave sound.
Thank you.
I think we may not have that on the Mayo Zoom. I think we don't. We're on an extra secure Mayo Zoom, everybody. So for better or worse.
Make do with what you got.
Exactly.
So everyone should feel ultra VIP with this particular secure version of the Zoom.
Well, Christina Reagan asked me for a Zoom, and I had to pull it off for her.
We appreciate it. I was going to do the I was very much going to work with Dr. Laporte and the Hopkins team here, and what ended up occurring is my family got sick like 2 times over, and it was just like a whirlwind over the last couple of weeks. So thank you for helping out with that. All right, we are at 3 of, and we'll go ahead and get started formally in just about 2 minutes, but just a few housekeeping rules as we get started here. First off, we're in this sort of one big happy family room, and so all the panelists should keep their video on and mute and unmute accordingly. And we apologize ahead of time for the chiming. We're not going to be able to control that completely, but suffice to say, for participants, please keep your video off and yourselves muted. You can use the chat box to ask questions, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible, either through the thick of conversation that we're having here, or through responses that any of the panelists may be kind of bringing up themselves when we talk, or specifically when when we try to bring them into the throes of conversation or answer them directly. This is really designed to be, we have a bunch of questions we've compiled from what you've sent. It's designed to be pretty informative, very interactive amongst the panelists. Obviously, we want to hear from you too. If we don't get to your question in particular, please, don't be alarmed. You can always reach out to us separately, and we'll throw our email addresses in there as well, so you can have some additional perspective. But on that humble note, as we turn the corner here to 9:05. And this finally, for everyone who's worried, friends are asking, oh my God, I need to get into this VIP Mayo Clinic Zoom right now. This will be recorded, and we will put this up. Even the last webinar from a week or two ago, I was sick with COVID and just haven't had a chance to actually, I got COVID 3 years later. Just haven't had a chance to upload it, but I will get this one as well as the other one up onto the Ortho Mentor channel on YouTube in the next handful of days. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and get started with introductions. To the right of me, this way, is Alan. So I'll go ahead and have him sort of kick things off, and then we can kind of keep going. We'll go from there to from him to Dr. Larson, to Dr. Laporte, to Tyler, to Kelsey. And I don't think Dr. Saltzman's on just yet. And then obviously Christine as well. And there's Dr. Saltzman. And then we can go then to Christine before we kick things off. Go for it, Alan.
Thank you. And thank you, Christina and Dr. Ayer, Dr. Laporte, and Dr. Larson for helping to put this together. My name is Alan Metz. I am an incoming resident to the University of Utah. I did my medical school at the University of Michigan, and then in between my 3rd and 4th years of medical school, did a research fellowship at the University of Utah in their division of sports medicine with Dr. Steve Aoki. Really happy to be here and looking forward to getting to learn a little bit more about everybody else and answer everybody's questions.
Awesome. Dr. Larson?
Hi, I'm Noelle Larson. I'm a pediatric orthopedic surgeon at Mayo Clinic, and I've had a variety of student researchers, medical student researchers, foreign medical grad researchers with me since 2011. So happy to shine whatever light I can on the process. And I work with Christina Reagan, who will tell us about herself as well, but she has been with me doing research for the last year.
Great. Dr. Laporte?
Hi, I'm Dawn Laporte. I'm a hand surgeon at Johns Hopkins and residency program director there, and I've been fortunate to work with a lot of medical students visiting and our own for longer than I probably want to say, and also fortunate to work with Dr. Ayer in my practice. And I'm excited to be here, and thank you to Dr. Reagan and Dr. Ayer and Dr. Larson.
Tyler?
Hi, my name's Tyler Williamson. I'm a incoming resident at University of Texas Health San Antonio. I went to medical school at the University of the Incarnate Word. It's down in San Antonio. It's a new DO school. And then I did a research year in between 3rd and 4th year in spinal deformity research at NYU.
Great, and thank you to you and Dr. Laporte as well. Kelsey?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey Martin. I am an incoming orthopedic surgery resident at Jefferson, New Jersey. I attended the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine for medical school, and I did a research year in between my 3rd and 4th year at the Cooper Bone and Joint Institute and MD Anderson Cancer Center.
Wonderful. Dr. Saltzman?
Hi, I'm Brian Saltzman. I'm an orthopedic sports surgeon at Orthocarolina in Charlotte, and our kind of affiliate institute through Atrium Health, or formerly the Carolina Medical Center here in Charlotte. And I started practice here in 2019, and so I'm going into getting ready to start my 5th year of practice and 5th year in my time working with medical students from a research standpoint.
And then Dr. Vora or Arjun.
Vora, name from Medicine Phoenix, research after my fourth year medical school at the University of Arizona, Colorado. I'm going there for ortho residency.
Okay, great. That was, you kind of cut out there a little bit. I don't know if everyone caught that. Do you mind repeating yourself one more time?
I know he's having some tech issues.
We'll go ahead and get back to him. You know, first off, thank you everyone for being here. I think that this is, and really, you know, for the opportunity to kind of help Christina and Dr. Larson kind of help host this. You know, we've, through all the Ortho Mentor ventures and kind of discussions about the match cycle and how it's gone from, you know, in the thick of COVID to where it's now, since the, you know, kind of worldwide emergency has been lifted. Obviously, a lot of things have changed. And certainly on the curricular side, steps gone to pass fail, grades have gone to pass fail in many institutions. So the notion of how do you really kind of amplify the various facets of your app and demonstrate interest and commitment is certainly something that cannot be understated. So on that humble note, I'll start with Kelsey. Congrats on, you know, getting ready to start with the residency. But what was the reason why you decided to do research here? What kind of drove you down that? What was the decision making for you?
Yeah, so I had a very early interest in orthopedics going into medical school, and was involved in a few projects my first and second year. But I felt like that it was very minimal involvement, kind of wanted to have a little bit more involvement in various projects, in addition to having more productivity with the projects that I was involved in. So naturally, I talked to mentors, even Dr. Iyer, kind of just assessing whether a research year was a good decision for me. And I think that it was a very good decision because I knew that I wanted projects that, several projects that I was the lead role or had a larger role in the project and knew that I could get it from start to finish. And I also just wanted to give my all to every project that I was involved in. I knew that if I had a focus year for research with as minimal distractions as possible, being a medical student, I could give high quality time to have that high quality research that I could highlight on my residency application. I also wanted to discover my personal research interests, and I was able to do that, kind of finding my niche in research, which I greatly enjoyed and kind of appreciated after my research year, kind of developing what kind of research do I actually want to do in my residency training and beyond. You know, research year, you're pretty much part of an ortho department. You're developing very strong relationships with the residents, the attendings, and I knew that that was something that would be definitely crucial to my residency application process. And honestly, later down the road, I didn't realize that the mentorship, the connections, the relationships, and more importantly, the advocacy was the most important part of my research year, in addition to the productivity and, you know, kind of gaining the ortho knowledge, being immersed in the field and kind of rediscovering my passion for orthopedics. A research year was definitely a very great decision for me moving forward.
That's really great to hear. And I'm going to circle back to kind of the osteopathic piece as well in a second. And I didn't do justice, but Christina, can you not only introduce yourself, but also touch upon why you decided to do a research year? Because you're obviously in the thick of it right now with Dr. Larson.
Yeah, so my name is Christina Regan, and I am currently a new MS4 at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, Phoenix. And I've always, you know, similar to Kelsey, have been interested in orthopedics. And it's something that I knew I wanted to kind of give my all to. And I've come from a standpoint of not having the strongest step one score. So I knew that I needed something to kind of help boost my application and make me more competitive while also showing, you know, my dedication to the field. And I, you know, went through the whole process of applying and met Dr. Larson and, you know, have loved every minute of my research year. So it was definitely the right decision for me. And it just, solidified my desire to go into orthopedics and my love for the field. So, for anyone that's considering taking a research year, I think it's definitely worth looking into, and I highly recommend it.
That's man, and I say this as someone who did a research year once upon a time. Granted, it was after not matching, and we can get into that in a little bit. But I want to hear the three of you, and now I'm going to bring in Tyler, kind of bringing up the points of like finding the research year, right? And so Tyler, to tell me about sort of your thought process for not only being an osteopathic student, and sort of how did that influence your decision making to do a year, but then also specifically, how did you kind of go about finding a research year, knowing that, again, kind of the osteopathic piece in particular, because the matches merged as of 3 years ago, back in 2020, and so every allopathic osteopathic kids are all together. For those who are not aware, so what was your thought process going into that?
Yeah, it was. I found orthopedics a little late. I was probably going to apply med peds up until about February of my third year. And so didn't have a lot of ortho related activities on my resume. So I jumped on a few projects and really liked the research aspect of it. It was something, I don't know, within the past 2 years, I feel like it's really gained a lot of traction. But that was something that I had heard was a big part of an orthopedic residency application was research. And one of my friends had recently done it from one of my schools, or from my school. And so when I started, counting on my hand the ways that it would help me in terms of mentorship, figuring out what field of orthopedic surgery I do like, what parts of research I want to get involved in. When I look to the future, about 10 to 15 years down the line, where do I see myself? Do I see myself doing research, working with residents, teaching, presenting, doing panels like this, being involved in leadership? And how much did a research year align with those goals as well? Not just the immediate goals that, the instant gratification of getting into residency, but looking down the future as well. How much will this kind of like springboard me to get where I need to be? And then I started like counting on the other hand in terms of COVID would have limited the amount of rotations I would have done. And I mean, at the end of the day, the only sacrifice that it was for me was 1 year. And I think, many residents told me not only how much it would help me get into residency, but also into fellowship and down the line as well. So for me specifically, the way I started looking into this was first using Twitter. I felt like that was very helpful. It put me in touch with OrthoGate, which is a great website to look through all of the research fellowships. The ones that are traditionally, they're year in, year out, Mayo Clinic, NYU, Johns Hopkins, they're all across the board in different subspecialties as well. And if you're interested in a research here, I would advise looking at it now just to get an idea of what is out there. And then when I started applying was kind of rather late. It was in probably May of my third year. I actually resorted to typing in ortho research on Twitter and then just scrolling through every tweet and then just seeing if I could find something, because I was so late in the game, there was very few opportunities left. And so really trying to find any way to find research opportunities. The one that I found was through OrthoGate. And I think it's a pretty good resource.
That's great to hear. And I'll tell you, and Al, I'm going to ask you about this in a second. When I was going through it, I was just emailing literally everyone and their mom. And I still remember not matching, sitting there with my hoodie up, in my room in Philadelphia, and just emailing everyone. And I think that if there is an academic center and you kind of look to see who's putting out papers from a given place, and you vibe with that research type, whether it's basic science, biomechanical, clinical, whatever, that can be very beneficial to say, hey, is to reach out, because that was before Instagram had taken off or anything like that. So, or Twitter for that matter. So it's now way easier to connect with people. And I think you can reach out, even if the programs don't formally exist. And that is how often things kind of establish. That's how I found mine. It was not because at that time there was no formal research fellowship, but it is now formalized, as a result of the people I did it with. So it's just another sort of way of thinking about it. Alan, how did you find yours, and sort of what parameters of the fellowship were you looking for specifically, kind of along, thinking along the lines of what Tyler was sharing as well, in terms of what was going to be important for not just application, but also, career down the line too?
Yeah, so I, like Tyler mentioned, I leaned very heavily on OrthoGate. I was fortunate to know that I wanted to do orthopedics since the time that I came into medical school, and I started to kick around the idea of doing a research year really about midway through my second year of medical school. So I had a little bit more time to angle my application and figure out what programs I wanted to send applications to. And the approach that I took was very early on in the process, maybe in the October timeframe before I would have started my research fellowship, was to start going through OrthoGate. And at that time, I think it's changed a little bit now. Programs are opening earlier and earlier. But at that time, the majority of them wouldn't open until January of the fellowship year. So I took to emailing those programs and reaching out very early and expressing my interest in them, and just making sure that they were going to have an application process that next year. And I think that that was well received by a lot of programs, and specifically the one that I ended up choosing. I know that that kind of came up as a strength of my application, that reaching out early. So I definitely encourage that. But three criteria that I looked at for research fellowships were productivity, autonomy, and teamwork. So the productivity piece, I think we're all, very well aware of. That is something that residency programs are going to be looking at, and that you should be looking at as an applicant if you're going to dedicate a year of your life to develop those skills. You want to have, certain deliverables at the end of it. But I think an equally important piece, and maybe even a more important piece in some respects, is the autonomy that the fellowship gives you. So I think it's important to ask about the opportunity for first author publications, the opportunity to conceive and develop and design and carry out your own research projects, the opportunity to present them at conferences. Those are, really valuable experiences. And I think that the research year gives you a perfect opportunity to do that. So you want to make sure the fellowship that you're applying to kind of aligns with that goal. And then the last thing was teamwork. This was probably one of the harder things to get a handle on. But you will see as you go through the process that there are varying degrees that the previous research fellow is involved in terms of interviews or soliciting applications or reaching out to provide information with you, and the other residents that are involved in the fellowship as well. And I think identifying that team early is very important, because it only serves to make you more productive during the research fellowship when you have the opportunity to lean on those other individuals.
That is all, wonderful. And Arjun, I'm going to kind of piggyback off of that and ask you, what kinds of things were important sort of for you at the outset? And then now kind of looking back, what kinds of things do you wish you had known, going into it?
I think something as far as like even on the outset with collaboration, it's about introducing yourself early. The whole program, when you join a residency program or you go and start working with a group of people you're not familiar with, I think it's about establishing that rapport early, even if it's just by sending your name out there with an email, with a call, going to didactics, making yourself visible, trying to get on new projects, and always interacting in a respectful manner, both inside and outside the hospital. I think that's the most important thing that anybody is looking for outside your productivity, is how you get along with the other people. And then the way you communicate with them. I think the most important thing is also how you communicate with your peers, and that framework you have around that, especially if you have another research fellow working with you. That person can be your strongest asset and your best friend, especially if you can really rely on them, lean on each other to take the lead on certain projects, but also double your productivity in that manner.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I'm going to make a statement or kind of comment about, just in response to what you said. When did you end up doing your research year, by the way?
I did my research year after medical school. So after I had gone unmatched, and then I did a research year after that.
Do you think that, and I did the same thing, looking back, do you think it would have been more prudent to do it sort of between second, third, fourth, like traditionally, or are you happy with the path that you ended up going down?
I think that if I could do it all over again, it would definitely be going between third and fourth or second and third. I think between third and fourth is probably better. Why do I say that versus the other way around? Is because third and fourth year, you're going to be doing your research year right before you get into your sub-Is and really get that face value. So if you're getting involved with an orthopedic program, the orthopedics is a small world where you go to do your sub-Is, where you do your away rotations. When you're applying for that during your research year, your research mentors can help reach out and start fostering those connections early, and you'll have seen them throughout the research path. Also, I think that there is a stigma, as much as we don't like it, against people who go unmatched. You have an extra thing to answer for at that time. However, I think if you embrace that challenge in the right way, I think you can make it a positive, put a positive spin on it.
Yeah, and that was exactly, kind of, I got asked that question all the time when I went through it, not having matched, and like, oh, why do you think it didn't match? And so having that answer articulated appropriately is important. To Dr. Laporte, I'll ask you the question, piggyback off of Arjun's answer of, when do you think, is there a right time? Is there a more ideal time from a program director perspective as to when to do the research here? Is it better to do it earlier on before having to kind of now come back to the fray of clinical work and maybe being a little rusty versus doing it earlier on, and then having a little bit more sort of time in that way, and even a little bit more longevity in terms of the research effort itself, because you can end up being theoretically more productive by the time you actually get to the applications. Is there a quote unquote a right or wrong in your mind, or is it very student dependent?
Thanks. Well, I think you could definitely argue it either way, and there are pros and cons to doing it between the 2 and 3 year, between the 3 and 4 year. I think traditionally, I would say you should take it after you've taken step 1 and completed all of your classroom education, so that that's done. So you're not having to circle back to that. I think we see more students doing it between the 3rd and 4th year, and the benefit of that is you've seen some of clinical medicine. You probably have more of your own ideas about things that you can do in research or that you're interested in. But then the flip side, like Dr. Iyer mentioned, is if you do it between the 2 and 3 year, you do have more time to complete your projects and papers, and there may be more already accepted publications when you apply. I think the most important thing is having a good reason to do the gap year, the research gap year, and then making the most of it when you do it. So being all in. So, that said, I think probably still the most common is between the 3rd and 4th year, but I think you could argue it either way. And as long as you have a good reason and you have a great year, I don't think it matters between those later years when you do it.
That's a great answer. And I think just for people to be aware, obviously it should be an individualized decision. I think there's pluses and minuses to when you do it, but be thoughtful and intentional with that decision making, and talk to faculty advisors and mentors to get some perspective if you are going down that line. And as you have heard, it's important to start thinking about it earlier, as Tyler mentioned it before too. Hey, doesn't hurt to look to see what's out there. I'll actually throw this question to Dr. Saltzman. How would you encourage, how do people find you in your fellowship, as an example, or what's going on over down at CMC? What's your suggestion to students about where to we've kind of heard from the resident side of it all, but how would you as a research fellowship director kind of encourage people to find you or find research fellowships that work for them?
Yeah, good question. I would answer that kind of reflective of what some of the ways people have been suggesting that they've looked for it. So like for me, in November, kind of around Thanksgiving time each year, I'll post onto my Twitter, which I've become a bit more active in to try and get some engagement, and then refer to OrthoGate, which was the first place that I was suggested from one of my mentors from residency to post it to, just because of the foot traffic there. And then I think what that's led to now year after year is what was also reflected before, which is I think people are starting to look at those from previous years, and then over the summer beforehand, I'll start getting emails that say, you know, are you going to post this position again in the fall? And is this something that you're going to do again? And so I think people will start getting a little bit of word of mouth from previous years and seeing that post from previous years to kind of be prepared for the upcoming year. And that's allowed them to find, you know, us and me and kind of our research fellowship here by just kind of looking ahead to that. So for me, it's predominantly social media and then OrthoGate. And then I think a lot of it becomes word of mouth as the years go by, where somebody has talked to somebody from their med school the year before who interviewed or did the fellowship with me. And that kind of has become more of a fulfilling prophecy each year.
That is awesome, and obviously it's continuing to do well. And Dr. Larson, obviously Christina's here on camera with us, so I'm sure she's doing a great job. But what are you looking for when someone's applying? What are sort of the factors that really stand out to you when you're saying, "Hey, I'm kind of trying to narrow the field"? What sort of, at least from your end, what's most important?
Well, we always want to work with people who are going to succeed. And I think to succeed in orthopedics, it is probably 1/3 knowledge, 1/3 energy level, and then 1/3 personality, right? So we always do a Zoom interview to make sure that we feel like we would work with you well in our Peds Ortho group, and that our personalities mesh, and that we have a passion for answering questions about children's orthopedics, and that we'll be able to work together. Energy level is also very important because doing research for a year is not an easy pathway. Christine and I started with one pathway, one project that I thought was going to be awesome. I've been collecting data for 5 years, waiting to do this project, and we delved into the data, and it wasn't what we thought, right? And so we had to regroup and pick another project. And I'd say whatever you encounter as far as challenges in clinical research are 10 times worse in basic science research. So you need patience, passion, energy, and then that personality really matters. I mean, at the end of the day, we're meeting with families and their children or patients and trying to convince them that we care about them. We want to take care of their orthopedic need. We're a trustworthy person that's going to see them through their recovery. So I think everyone needs to do a little soul searching and figure out if they have that personality to be an orthopedic surgeon. We tend to be happy people. And so if you're a kind of a negative person or not an optimist, that also I think is hard to succeed as an orthopedic surgeon. Generally we're doing an interview, we're looking at the CV, we're looking at the academics and seeing if we think this person is going to succeed as an orthopedic surgeon. And if so, then we're all in. And we're going to do whatever we can to prepare that person for their away rotations and prepare that person for their applications. But it's a long process, once you have a abstract and a presentation at a meeting, that's probably the 50-yard mark, right? You're halfway to the publication. There's still another big round of work to do. So I guess the other thing I've thought about looking at that I haven't is writing ability, because that's often where you're stuck. You're at the abstract, you need the publication to submit your application. You want to have a list of PubMed referenced publications, and that involves writing. So I think if you're looking to increase your number of papers, being a good writer is super helpful.
That is great information and great insight. And now, Kelsey, I want to ask you kind of along those lines of what cemented in doing your research here at Cooper for one, and how did you prep going into that year? Like what was sort of what kinds of things did you do to get ready for it?
Yeah, so I chose my research year for a variety of reasons. I knew that I was interested in having a well-rounded research fellowship, which meant that I was going to be working with the sports department, joints, oncology, trauma, kind of just working with a wide variety of attendings so that I can get to know the entire department. I knew that I wanted to also expand upon my interest in oncology, but I also have past research experience working in basic science and also wanted to explore that avenue as well. So I was actually involved in basic science research using animal models during my research year, which was kind of like a unique path that was different than the clinical research that I was involved in. I also wanted the opportunity to work with multi-institutional studies with the area physicians like Rothman, Harvard, Mayo, just kind of developing a relationship with research mentors all over the country. And, you know, those are people that continue to be my research mentors today into the future of my career. I also wanted free reign to develop my own studies, be first author on as many studies as I wanted to. I wanted to be in a research department where I was self-motivated, where I was able to develop my own schedule kind of, and also choose the type of studies that I wanted to be involved in. What I thought was also important was that I wanted to be as productive as possible. So, you know, I set a goal. I wanted to be involved in 25 plus projects. So I wanted to have 10 to 15 publications by the time that I applied. So it was important to me to be involved in projects even before my research fellowship started, so that when I came in, I already had things that were going that could be finished at a relatively fast pace. And that also resulted in abstracts and things being already submitted for me to present at different conferences. But I think the most important thing was having lots of face time with the faculty, the residents. You know, a research fellowship is a whole year where you're able to get to know your attendings, and also, you know, you get to ask questions to the residents that have been there before, that know what it's like to be a medical student applying to residency, and also being a resident that can kind of tell you what it's like to be a resident and how to prepare for your sub-Is. And, you know, during my research year, I felt like that, you know, I was able to get to know pretty much every single person in the department that, you know, it's kind of like a second family to me, and are going to be my mentors for life. You know, I was able to see the attendings. I saw the chief of the department, the program director multiple times a week. And I thought that that was very important, developing those relationships to develop those mentoring connections that could be ultimately rewarding in your residency application process.
And I can talk a little bit about preparation going into research years. I think one thing that will slow people down when they go, you know, into publishing and working on their projects is statistics. So one of the things that I tried to do was make sure that I understood some of this like the statistical tests and the reasoning behind, like when you would use a t-test versus when you would use a chi-squared. And I don't think you necessarily have to go and do a deep dive in, like, you know, really understand, like really, you know, do college level statistics. But what I did at that time was like look through, you know, orthopedic publications that had been published in the past and just like looked at the kinds of tests that they ran, and then kind of just did a deep dive on those ones. And that really helped me because, you know, during my year, I did all of my stats, and, you know, when I had a question, I was able to like contact the statistician, but I never felt that I was, you know, limited or held up by the statistical process.
Yeah, I think it probably another kind of great point is talking to the prior research fellow if that exists, and to get a feel for, or research fellows if there's not a current one, because even in that department, things probably run similarly. So even if it's a newer fellowship, you can still get a feel for how to do things as a whole, or how things run, some of the logistical considerations, et cetera, by talking to those people, right? So establishing that connection can be very beneficial. I do think, and I think may have been Tyler or Alan who brought up earlier, but you know, we certainly have this, you know, here at Hopkins with a lot of, there's a variety of fellowships and research fellowships in a variety of different disciplines. And the fellows frequently reach out beyond that of their specialty fellowship and to other attendings to establish, you know, projects and so on. And that was in part why, you know, this past year, Dr. Laporte and I had collaborated across a bunch of different things. You know, I would say because we were able to collaborate with several of the research fellows outside of, you know, quote unquote, our purview, who were interested, wanted to like research XYZ things, and that was a great great opportunity to get to know people. I think the more time you can really sort of permeate yourself in a given department, the better it is, without inadvertently hindering, right, the obligations you have to the individuals that you're working with, right? Dr. Salz, Dr. Laporte, Dr. Larson, and others. I mean, that finding that balance is really important because you don't want to spread yourself too thin inadvertently. On that humble note, I'll ask you, Alan, how did you, when you were going through the process and figuring this out, how did you kind of think about asking about that advocacy piece, right? Asking about whether someone was going to be willing to go to bat for you at the time of residency, asking about, hey, like, how does the authorship, process work? Those are delicate conversations, and not everyone's sort of privy to knowing how to do that. How did you approach that? I'll go from you first, and then to Tyler next.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think for me, I've been very lucky that the groups that I have worked with have been very open about authorship. With my research fellowship specifically, we had a pretty structured process whenever we would either be initiating a new project or bringing on a new individual, which when we were initiating a new project, that was just one of the items that we would discuss at the outset, who is, the primary investigator on this project, and then how the authorship is planned to shake out. And we would do the same thing if somebody was brought on kind of in the middle, if it was just for like a minor, data collection standpoint. And while I recognize that all groups may not be like that, I think that it's been very effective for me and has cut down on the problems that can come, surrounding submission time when individuals may feel slighted if that, isn't out in the open early on. So I think that it's incumbent on the research fellow to really push that issue to the forefront, just so everybody's on the same page, and then you don't run into those issues on the back end. And I think that it also helps to delegate work and really gives everybody a role. And then this is the, sort of reward that you're going to receive for that role.
That's awesome. Tyler, your thoughts? Same question.
Yeah, I mean, just to like touch on that, I think the theme here is accountability too. That's, I think, the strongest asset of any student researcher is accountability. It's very easy to reach out. Even if you're not doing research, you're reaching out to Dr. Iyer or Dr. Laporte and saying, hey, I want to get involved on a research project. And then it's very easy to send that email and show interest, but then coming through day to day and really sticking to what you said that you were going to do is, I think, the most valuable aspect. And it goes back to what Dr. Iyer said in terms of overloading yourself, know how much you can handle, ease yourself into it, so that you know how much you can handle and you can really retain that accountability aspect. And I don't know, authorship was something that came up a little bit in residency interviews. I had one, I remember it very specifically. The research coordinator interviewed me and he said, oh, you have 3 publications. And I was like, I thought maybe he got like confused with the guy behind me in the residency interviews. And I was like, I don't know if you have my application right or if something didn't come through or something. And he was like, oh, I meant 3 first authors. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, like, what about the other projects? And they're like, well, we just really can't judge the how much effort you put into those other projects. Did you just get your name on a paper or something? And when you're at bigger name institutions, authorship is, I mean, like Alan said, very important, and it's something delineated from the idea. And that's something that I really didn't think a lot. I'm a very humble person in terms of sitting back and just letting that handle itself. I just like doing the research. So if I'm last, first, it doesn't really matter too much to me. It did come up though in residency interviews, so I guess it is rather important. But I think that is something that realize that the research is the important part and the authorship is something that comes about. But one thing that I really don't like is when people reach out to me and they ask, oh, what is the authorship on this paper? What is, when we start an idea? And that's something I think that's very disingenuous, that I think, that's something that kind of delineates itself. And I think showing interest and getting involved in projects, showing accountability, all of that will come in the end. And really just being held accountable for what work you say you're going to do really builds camaraderie with the PIs that you're going to be working with in a specific department, a specific institution, and the authorship will come with that. And I think the advocacy will as well, as long as you continue to show accountability.
I really like that answer. And personally, you know, I try to be very thoughtful and proactive with the authorship piece, and in the context of trying to, you know, hey, not necessarily kind of make that the priority per se, but make it as clear as possible, like sort of, hey, like XYZ people are doing this, that's going to get them to like first, second, third, and also be strategic in the context of residency application and kind of what's happening down there too, right? Because someone who's like, you know, while a first, second, whatever year resident, maybe applying a fellowship in a couple of years, right? And that's an important consideration. The first, they may not have the bandwidth to take on sort of that lead role. And so it makes more sense for a medical student who does have the time to contribute and can commit to perhaps be in that first, second spot. And I think having those open conversations is important, you know, as a whole, but also should be, for my end at least, be driven by the senior people, aka I think I, as the, you know, PI on a given project, should help drive that, and it shouldn't necessarily, the expectation shouldn't fall on the resident per se, or the med student or whatever. Should be sort of, if anything, hey, like let's have this open conversation about it. And I think it obviously happens in different ways, but yeah, I'm of the same mindset. I don't think it really matters at the end of the day. I do like to hear from Dr. Laporte, Dr. Larson, and Dr. Salzman in that order about, from a application perspective for residency, is there, how does that influence at the various institutions? How is that perceived in terms of just the volume of publication versus the volume of first author or second author or authorship as a whole, you know, when the application is being reviewed? I'll start with you, Dr. Laporte.
Fair. So we don't get hung up on number of publications, but that you have publications that you own, that you took start to finish, and you know, often that's reflected in being a first author. But not always. So I think, especially if you've done a research gap year, you should be prepared to answer, is there a project that you are most proud of, or that you learned the most doing, or that is most meaningful to you, and be, you know, ready to talk about that enthusiastically. If you do a research gap year, you do have to show that you were productive. So even though I said we don't really look at numbers, like we don't distinguish between if somebody has 6 publications or 20, honestly. It's more the quality and their role in it. But if you did do a research gap year, I think you have to have some publications. And there's a paper out there that says that the threshold is at least 5. You know, nobody's checking off a box with that, but if you're going to take an entire year to do research, you want to show some productivity from that. So from how we look at applications, it's really the quality of the work and your role, and then, you know, how you can talk about it and present that.
Great. Dr. Larson, same question.
Yeah, I guess I would second that as well, that if someone has done an entire research year and does not have some presentations or projects or submissions, that's a little bit of a red flag. We understand that the publication process can take like 2 years, right? You're doing a really great project and, you know, you submit it to AAOS and you don't hear back for 7 months, whether it was accepted or not. I mean, there's a huge lag time, and that kind of goes back to starting a little bit earlier in the process, and your second or third year of medical school is going to help you reach that goal of multiple PubMed publications a little faster. I think, again, the kind of the teamwork, like if you can pick up a project that was abandoned or lost, we always try and go for like a portfolio of different projects. So a few independent projects of your own for the gap year student, a few abandoned projects where they just need a little bit of help to make it over the finish line, and then a few multi-center projects will have the opportunity to operate, to interact with other attendings and other institutions potentially. And as far as authorship, I mean, we really try and live by the rule that whoever prepares the first draft of the manuscript and is able to push that through the review process, I mean, that person should be the author. And if a student's working on something, I try to be upfront early about, well, I think you can be first author if you can achieve, a first draft, or if you can help us with the review process. So hopefully it's a variety, but I would encourage everybody here to not be afraid to talk about authorship. And that's where you really end up with the hard feelings and the difficult situations where you don't start talking about authorship till May or June. Really, that should be something started when the project starts.
Those are a great point. I do think, and especially because it is, I mean, just when you think about it, not every journal allows for like 10 authors. And so, which I think is how sometimes people end up getting kicked off inadvertently, because there wasn't this discussion, or we're going to plan on, submitting to whatever journal. As Kelsey was mentioning, the chat, being familiar with that's helpful, and especially when you're thinking about targeting certain journals for certain topics of interest, that can be valuable too, to know, hey, how many people can we have on this thing? Because as we want to help each other out, as we mentioned earlier, we also want to be cognizant of the fact that you can't just add your buddy on just to add your buddy on, and because again, maybe the authorship, there's an author limitation. Dr. Saltzman, kind of your thoughts on that same question from before.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree with all that's been said. I think from the standpoint of determining authorship, kind of talking about that up front is really important for me and for my research fellow. That's important for me to make sure that I'm protective of him or her. And if I know that there's a project that he or she each year is starting and running the show on, then I'm going to make sure that there's not somebody who takes over for that, and on the closing steps and is reflected appropriately in the authorship order. And I think that's important to make sure that kind of we, in our role as the coordinators of these positions, are kind of looking to make sure that we're seeing what's reflected in the amount of work put in on what the authorship list looks like. I think from the from the resident standpoint of residency interviews and such, I think quality is, there's some level of quantity, as was said, as far as, yes, there's a difference between having 2 papers and having 30 papers. That's an obvious, visible difference. But it then comes down to, obviously, subtleties of quality in the research and where you are in the research order and the list, such that, I think if you're a first author on a case report in a 6th-tier journal versus being a second author on a, from a sports standpoint, an AJSM article on a prospective study, that has a different connotation to it as well. And I would say that, I remember from being a resident, and I was a med student and a resident at Rush, which is, a mecca of kind of orthopedic research, and knowing I wanted to go into sports, I was involved in the sports department. I had a lot of research that I was able to do, and that was a big part of what I wanted to do there and build into my practice. So I started that early, and I had a large number of publications by the time that residency interviews came around. And that can be a little bit dangerous if you're not smart about it, because just getting onto a paper as a 5th author, if I remember being asked on things that it was important to us when we did things that you contributed to the things that you were an author on, and that's reflected in the residency interviews when I was in that stand, or when I was a medical student and now on the back end, to be able to say, all right, well, if you're a 4th author on a study with 9 authors and you come into a residency interview and somebody asks you about that paper and you have no idea what happened in that project, that looks really bad. And then that all of a sudden reflects on all those investigations that you did that you're not first author on. So I think being a co-author in a paper, but that you're able to competently and cohesively speak about, to suggest that you did have an important role in that, can be reflected in an interview. And so you just got to make sure that you know your research.
That's a wonderful point, and I can't tell you the number of times I've been asked over the years. I literally had breakdancing on my hobbies and was asked to do so at several of my interviews, and I'm not even joking when I tell you that. And so anything is fair game, right? Even on the research side, right? So it doesn't matter if it gets published in you know, the Indian Journal, blah, blah, blah. Like it doesn't, people will want to know about it because again, it's how committed are you? You know, Arjun, you've definitely had, similar to me, have embraced the challenges that the match process has offered. How did the relationships that you established through your research year, how did that play into, you know, your ultimate match when it happened? And congrats, by the way. How did that play a role at the point that you did match? Is it something that you feel like you wish you had established ahead of time? How did that kind of you know, help things out and help you succeed in it? We may have lost him. Okay, so Kelsey, I will ask you the same question. How did the advocates that you and mentors you developed at your research fellowship in Cooper, how did that help with the match process, you know, this past year?
Yeah, I mean, it extends to even before the residency application process for me, down to where should I apply for sub-Is? Where should I apply for residency? What are some programs that I should be looking for, and what should I also be looking for in a program? You know, it wasn't just the you know, finding the residency that I was looking for. It was kind of just also getting the letters of recommendations, as well as the advocacy in terms of reaching out to program directors for me, reaching out to different faculty of programs that I was interested in. You know, I would say that with my research year, in addition to the connections that I was able to get within the program, I was able to extend that even beyond my own research fellowship because of the multi-institutional studies that I was involved in, which I would say was very beneficial to my overall residency application process for sure.
Wonderful. Arjun, back to you with the question of how did your research mentors sort of influence the match process ultimately?
I mean, I wouldn't be matched without the relationships. I think my relationships have given me the most amount that I could have ever asked for from the match process. They've given me mentorship. They've given me people of who I want to strive to be like, who I want to practice like. And ultimately, it's inspired me to become a research mentor in the future, and how I want to go about doing that to support the people who go unmatched or people who I work with. And I kind of made that frame of reference for me. You'll learn a lot through your research process, more from the people you work with and about who you want to be. I can't state that enough, as the research is only a very small part of what actually comes out of your research year.
I would echo that same sentiments. Alan, to you, same question. How did the mentorship piece kind of influence things for you?
Yeah, I don't think that I have too much to add based on what Kelsey and Arjun have said. I really can't speak, you know, highly enough, and I'm super appreciative of the mentorship and support that I received as a result of my research fellowship. And I think the thing that I will add to complement the answer that's already been given is that mentorship is a two-way street, right? So you have to find somebody who is willing to mentor you, but you have to be willing to be a mentee. And I think that a good way to go about that is to, you know, be willing to share your personal goals, whether it's in your professional life or you know, your personal life with that individual. And I think that, you know, giving them as much information as you can just sets them up in a better position to be able to help you.
That's great. Tyler?
Yeah, if I'm a medical student listening to this right now, my next question is, so how do I find the research fellowships that have, like, which ones are good advocates as PIs, which ones are not? It goes back to the theme that we talked about earlier in terms of reaching out to the prior research fellows. When you learn about the history of the research fellowship, if your sole intention is to get into residency, I would probably figure out, okay, have students matched coming from this research fellowship, if that's one of your main goals. And then also what, you know, and it is a two-way street in terms of, yes, you are here to help with research and And yes, you are here to learn, but you're also here to gain something as well. And it's a balance in terms of advocating for yourself and then allowing your work to advocate for you. But figuring it out both from the interview, like Dr. Larson talked about, talking with them, see how personable they are and how willing, I talked about it in the chat, but kind of that feeling that you get from them, is that somebody that you feel like is going to go to bat for you later down the line as well? Not just, oh, I'm in a vulnerable position applying for a research spot, I'll take anything that I can get. Because I think the research part is very impactful, but if you're looking to get into residency, I don't think the research is necessarily the biggest part here. It's the mentorship that you gain from it. I would have sacrificed a few publications to maybe spend a little bit more time getting to know people within my department, institution, other institutions, knowing what I know now. But yeah, I would say that it was the difference. I mean, much like Arjun, it was the difference between me matching and not matching. It was the first person from my school to ever match. So I knew I had to do something different than everyone else had. So I took a research year. That was one reason why I took it. But I think the mentorship is the biggest play. And if you don't have that, and if you're not getting that vibe from both the faculty and the prior research fellows, I don't think it's worth spending a year of your life doing.
I think all really important points. And I think that it's, you'll find some places that are considered more historically machines, so to speak, in some capacity, and others really have that sort of, to Tyler's point, is built in, and everyone else has alluded to, built in, kind of mentorship piece. But finding that, the productivity element is important, but the relationships and connections and the people are probably as important, if not even more important in some capacity, because what we've even found in recent data is that the kind of reaching out, those personal communications between between faculty and programs is very strongly looked at by program directors as far as the value proposition in the match process. And obviously it's gotten a little bit more crazy with, the advent of signals and the continuation signals this upcoming cycle. So those are things you have to be mindful of too. As we're kind of rounding out the hour here, I just want to ask Dr. Salzman, Dr. Larson, and Dr. Laporte in that order to kind of chime in on how do you advocate for your students, especially the ones that you have worked with, either in a research fellow capacity or in a research capacity. How does that occur from your perspective? Dr. Salzman, start.
Okay, I thought you said my name first. So I think the world of orthopedic surgery gets really, really small as you get through each part of the process. And so by the time you get into actually practice, especially the academic world of orthopedics is tremendously small. And so for me, it's sending emails, texts, phone calls to either people that I know at different programs in support of my research fellows, and trying to connect them, as well as in some multi-center approach of research efforts. So sometimes we can get our fellows to connect with other programs via the actual research during the year itself. But it becomes a lot of discussions with people that I know or have worked with in the past, or know somebody who knows somebody, to try to get that that person connected with someone from a hometown or a home or a local program that's of interest. So for me, it's as best as I can. It's a lot of direct communication to kind of support and help my research fellows.
Awesome, Dr. Larson.
I've kind of gone down the road a few different ways, but ultimately to match an ortho, you need some clinical experience and somebody who will go to bat saying that you're going to be a good clinician. And so I agree, part of the value of the research here is getting prepared for your away rotations or your clinical rotations. For people who don't match and then graduate, that becomes very, very difficult, because suddenly you don't have access to do more clinical rotations. So I've kind of learned that if you don't match, the best thing is to stay away from the MD or the DO for a year and kind of postpone that graduation. And that still allows you to do clinical rotations, because I think doing the way rotations are really your best chance at matching. Matching at your home program is another best chance at matching. And for sure, we do all the other things. We contact people at other institutions, we call, we email, but the whole process has become really competitive, and it's been challenging, right? With now the pass-fail nature of many med schools and pass-fail for step one. It's harder to distinguish yourself.
If I may, Dr. Larson, I recently, I don't know if this might be of interest to people in the group, there is a new opportunity in certain states for what they call an assisted physician position. So places in like Missouri and Arizona and certain states, if you're looking for that hybrid of I've graduated and I need clinical experience as well as research experience, certain positions, like at my previous institution at St. Louis University, are starting to more and more adapt this role where they have a research fellow come on and the department sponsors them as an assisted physician role where they can get a temporary license, kind of like a PA or MP, and work in both the clinical and academic aspect. But this is a very more emerging aspect to the research fellowship, but it's something you people on this chat might be interested in pursuing.
Yeah, I think I've definitely heard of those, and they've been around even from when I was kind of going through the process a handful of years ago. And I think it's asking about this research piece specific, or a clinical piece specifically, is also important, because while a letter coming from a research mentor is great, it's even more beneficial if the research mentor can also speak to your clinical capabilities, because that is something that we often get asked. I get asked about that all the time during the kind of residency interview process. So certainly something to kind of inquire about during the interview for your research fellowship. But Dr. Laporte, any final thoughts on the kind of advocacy piece?
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think there's a really big importance to that personal communication, and orthopedic surgeon likes to hear from a colleague that, this person has done an outstanding job, and that word of support. And so besides the importance of mentorship and picking good, thoughtful ways and making those connections and doing research with colleagues and networking, we reach out when their application hits to a handful of programs to say, this is an outstanding applicant. Definitely take a look at their application. We do the same thing right before the interviews. So they're kind of looking out for them. So calling or emailing a colleague, and then for a top choice program at the rank time. So I think that personal communication and advocacy is becoming more and more important, as everybody said.
Wonderful thoughts and perspective. And on that humble note, we're just about 5 of, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. To Dr. Laporte, Dr. Salzman, Dr. Larson, thank you so much for being here, taking time out of your busy schedules. To Dr. Vora, Dr. Martin, Dr. Williamson, Dr. Metz, and soon to be Dr. Reagan in the not so distant future. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Your insight is super valuable. We appreciate it. And these are all important. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but know that we're here and around, virtually or in person, depending on where you're at. So check out the various institutions that people have ended up at if you're gearing up to apply for fellowship, and let us know if there's other questions that pop up. But best of luck to you, and thank you so very much to everyone for being here tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for coming, and feel free to email us.